You didn't plan for this moment, neither did they. But here you both are, silent, no calls, no texts, no just checking in messages that never really meant what they said, just silence. And most people watching this right now think that silence means peace. They think it means the story is over. They think both sides are finally healing, finally moving on, finally free. They are wrong. What actually happens when both you and a narcissist go quiet at the same time is one of the most psychologically intense events that can unfold between two human beings. And almost nobody talks about what really goes on beneath the surface during this silence. Not on your side, and especially not on theirs. Because on the surface, everything looks still. But underneath, two completely different worlds are being shaken to their core. And one of those worlds is about to crack open in ways that will genuinely surprise you. Stay right here, because what you are about to understand is going to change how you see everything that happened and everything that is coming next. Let's start with the moment the silence actually begins. Think back to it. You stopped reaching out. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was a decision you made at 2 a.m. when you finally couldn't carry the weight of it anymore. Maybe someone told you about no contact and something inside you said, yes, this is it. Whatever the reason, you went quiet. And so did they. And for a brief moment, the world held its breath. Now here's the first thing almost no one tells you. When you go silent, you feel it immediately. The silence lands on you like a physical weight. Your phone feels different. You catch yourself reaching for it. Out of habit, muscle memory built from months or years of responding, apologizing, explaining, and managing. You feel the absence of the chaos, and somehow that absence feels louder than the chaos itself ever did. That is not weakness. That is not you being dramatic. That is your nervous system doing exactly what it was trained to do. You are conditioned to respond. Going silent breaks that conditioning, and your body registers it as something close to withdrawal. Meanwhile, and this is where it gets deeply revealing, the narcissist experiences the first 60 seconds of your silence in a way that is almost the polar opposite of what you feel. They don't feel the weight. They don't feel the absence in their chests the way you do. What they feel at first is almost nothing. A flicker of mild irritation, a slight disturbance in their routine, the way you might feel when your favorite app crashes or when traffic is slower than usual. Not grief, not loss, not love pulling at them. Just a minor inconvenience registering on the edges of their awareness. And that, right there, that single difference in how the first moments of silence land on each of you tells you everything you need to know about the relationship you just left. But here is where it gets complicated. Here is where the story takes a turn that even people who have been through narcissistic abuse often don't fully see coming, because that mild irritation, it doesn't stay mild, it doesn't fade away. It grows slowly at first, then faster, then in ways that begin to look very different from the outside. The narcissist's inner world, which looked calm and unbothered in those first hours, starts to shift. And what it shifts into is something far darker and far more desperate than most people expect. You need to understand something fundamental about how a narcissist experiences the world before you can truly grasp what your silence does to them. A narcissist does not draw their sense of self from within. They cannot. There is no stable internal identity they return to when the world gets quiet. What they have instead is a mirror, and you were that mirror. Every time you responded to them, every time you reacted, got angry, cried, apologized, or even just acknowledged their existence, you were reflecting something back to them that they desperately needed to see. They needed to see that they mattered, that they had power, that they were significant. Your silence removes the mirror entirely. And a narcissist standing in front of an empty mirror doesn't just feel lonely. They feel something closer to a quiet, creeping terror. Because without the reflection, the image they've built of themselves, the grandiose, untouchable, always in control image, starts to flicker like a television losing signal, like a voice recording playing back with the volume slowly being turned down until you can barely hear it. This is the phase almost no channel, no psychologist, no article online properly describes. Because from the outside, during these first hours or days of mutual silence, the narcissist looks completely fine. They might even look better than fine. They might post on social media. They might seem busy and unbothered. They might reach out to other people, laugh loudly, perform normalcy with frightening precision. But inside the place they never let anyone see, something has begun to loosen. And before this video is over, you are going to see exactly what that loosening leads to. You are going to understand why your silence is not passive. It is not nothing. It is not you simply disappearing. It is the single most powerful thing you have ever done in this dynamic. And the narcissist already knows it, even if they would never admit it to a living soul. Right now, in this moment of quiet, you are not the one falling apart. They are. Let's go deeper. Be what is actually happening inside the narcissist's mind during this silence, because this is where the story gets genuinely shocking, not in a dramatic, exaggerated way, but in the quiet, clinical, deeply unsettling way that only the truth can be shocking. What happens inside a narcissist when the silence stretches from hours into days is a process that psychologists have studied, documented, and consistently found surprising even after decades of research. And understanding it is not just fascinating, it is healing. Because when you see it clearly, you stop wondering if you made a mistake by going quiet. You stop asking yourself if you should reach out. You stop second guessing the one thing that is finally genuinely working in your favor. Here is what happens. The narcissist enters what can only be described as a surveillance state. They go quiet externally, but internally they become hyperactive. Every piece of information available to them about you gets analyzed. Your last social media post, who liked your photo, whether your profile picture changed, whether a mutual friend mentioned your name, whether you were seen somewhere by someone who might report back. They are not grieving you. They are studying you. They are running calculations. They are trying to determine one single thing above everything else. Did you actually leave, or are you just waiting for them to come back? This distinction matters enormously to them, because if you are simply testing them, waiting for them to chase, then the power dynamic they built is still intact. They can afford to wait. They can play the game. But if you have genuinely withdrawn, if this silence is real and not a tactic, then something in their carefully constructed world has gone structurally wrong. And that possibility that you might have actually meant it this time is what begins to pool at the edges of their composure. Think about what it means to build your entire sense of self on the reactions of other people. Imagine that every morning you wake up and the first thing you need, not want, but need the way you need oxygen, is confirmation that you still matter. Confirmation that someone out there is thinking about you, affected by you, shaped by your presence. Most people get a version of this from relationships, friendships, work, family. But for a narcissist, this need is not balanced by anything internal. It is not moderated by self-awareness or genuine connection. It is a raw, unfiltered hunger that must be fed constantly, and you are feeding it. Every argument, every apology, every tearful late-night conversation, every time you checked their profile, even after they hurt you, all of it was food. All of it kept the hunger manageable. Your silence is starvation. And just like all starvation, the effects don't show up immediately. The first day they function. The second day they function. But by the third day, by the end of the first week, by the time a full cycle of their normal routine has passed without your input, The hunger becomes something they can no longer quietly manage. It starts to leak out in ways they don't fully control. They become irritable with other people in their life. They become distracted. They revisit old conversations, not because they miss you in any meaningful emotional sense, but because those conversations are evidence that you existed in their orbit, that you were real, that they were powerful enough to have affected you. They are not thinking about how you are feeling. Let that land for a moment. During the days when you are processing genuine grief, untangling years of emotional confusion, learning to sleep without the anxiety of wondering what mood they will be in tomorrow, during all of that, they are not sitting somewhere wondering how you feel. They are wondering how your absence reflects on them. They are asking themselves not, did I hurt her? Or did I hurt him? But rather, what does it say about me that they stopped responding? The self-referential loop never breaks. Even in the silence, even in what looks from the outside like a period of reflection, it is never actually about you. It is always only about them. Now here is the part that trips people up. Here is the thing that causes people who have left narcissists to doubt themselves, to reach back out, to undo weeks of hard-won distance in a single weak moment. The narcissist, somewhere between day 4 and day 10 of genuine mutual silence, will often make a move. Not always. Not every narcissist operates on the same timeline. But there is a predictable window where the discomfort of your absence crosses a threshold and they feel compelled to act. And the way they act is designed, whether consciously or through years of instinct, to target exactly the part of you that is most vulnerable. They will not typically come back aggressive. They will not come back demanding, because some part of them, the part that is highly attuned to emotional dynamics, knows that aggression will push you further away. Instead, they come back soft. They come back nostalgic. They send the kind of message that costs them nothing but lands on you with the weight of everything you ever wanted to hear from them. A simple, I've been thinking about you, a photo of something that reminds them of a good memory, a carefully constructed sentence that sounds like the beginning of an apology without containing a single actual admission of fault. And here is why this matters more than almost anything else in this entire video. When that message arrives, if it arrives, your body will respond before your mind does. Your heart rate will change. Something will move in your chest. Because that message is not landing on who you are right now, today in this silence. It is landing on every version of you that ever loved them, hoped for them, believed them when they promised things would be different. It bypasses your rational mind entirely and speaks directly to your history. That reaction is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is the result of a bond that was built deliberately over time through cycles of warmth and withdrawal, that your nervous system learned to respond to the way Pavlov's dogs learn to respond to a bell. The pull you feel is real. The emotion is real, but what it is pointing toward is not. And that is exactly why you need to understand what happens next. Let's talk about what happens when you don't respond to that message. When you see it, feel it land in your chest exactly the way they knew it would, and you still don't reply. Because this is the moment everything changes. This is the fork in the road that almost nobody warns you about. Most content about narcissistic abuse tells you to go no contact. Most content tells you to stay strong when they reach out. But very little content tells you what actually unfolds on their end when you hold the line. When you see the message, feel the pull, and still say nothing. What happens in their world during the hours and days after that moment is something you genuinely need to see clearly, because it will make staying silent not just easier, but feel like the only logical choice you could ever make. When the narcissist sends that soft, carefully constructed message and receives nothing back, the surveillance state they were already in shifts into something more intense. The mild discomfort that started on day 1, the creeping unease that built through the first week, now transforms into something they are completely unprepared to handle. it transforms into genuine anxiety. Not the anxiety you felt throughout the relationship, the walking on eggshells. What mood are they in today? Anxiety that became the background noise of your daily life. This is different. This is their anxiety. And for a person who has spent years, sometimes decades, engineering a life where they are always the one with the upper hand, always the one who decides when to engage and when to withdraw, always the one who holds the power in emotional exchanges, feeling genuine anxiety about another person's response is profoundly destabilizing. Here is something important to understand. Narcissists are not actually as emotionally powerful as they appear. The confidence, the control, the apparent indifference to other people's pain, none of that comes from a place of genuine strength. Yet it comes from a place of carefully managed fear. Fear of being seen as ordinary. Fear of being exposed as someone who needs people more than they let on. Fear of being abandoned before they can do the abandoning. The entire performance of narcissistic behavior, the manipulation, the gaslighting, the cycles of idealization and devaluation is at its core a defense mechanism, a very sophisticated, very damaging defense mechanism built to protect a self that underneath all the armor is profoundly fragile. Your silence is the first thing in a very long time that has gotten past the armor. And when it gets past the armor, what it finds there is not the confident, unbothered person they showed you. What it finds is something much closer to a frightened child who never learned how to sit with discomfort, who never developed the emotional tools to regulate themselves without external input, who genuinely does not know how to feel okay without someone else providing that okayness for them. This is not an excuse for what they did. This is not a reason to feel sorry for them in a way that pulls you back. This is simply the truth of what is underneath the behavior that hurt you, and knowing that truth is power, because here is what that frightened, unregulated inner state does when it cannot reach you. It turns outward. It starts looking for substitute supply. The narcissist, now rattled in ways they won't acknowledge even to themselves, begins to increase their contact with other people in their life. They become suddenly more attentive to friends they had been neglecting. They might resurface with a family member they hadn't spoken to in months. They may accelerate a situationship that was previously casual, suddenly giving that person more attention, more charm, more of the version of themselves they know is attractive. This is not them healing. This is not them moving on in any genuine sense. This is them patching a leak. They are not filling the hole you left because they valued what you gave them. They are filling it because they cannot function with the hole there. Watch for this if you share any mutual connections. Watch for the sudden social activity. Watch for the performance of being fine, of being thriving, of having moved effortlessly onward. Because the performance is always loudest when the reality underneath is most desperate. A person who is genuinely okay does not need to broadcast their okayness. A person who is genuinely moving on does not need an audience for their moving on. The louder and more visible their apparent wellness becomes, the more certain you can be that behind it, something is unraveling. Now let's come back to you. Because while all of this is unfolding on their side, something extraordinary is happening on UA, ours, and it deserves far more attention than it typically gets. In the middle of this silence, somewhere between the grief and the confusion and the moments where you almost broke and reached out, your body is doing something remarkable. Your nervous system, which spent months or years in a state of chronic activation, always alert, always scanning, always braced for the next emotional impact, is beginning slowly and tentatively to stand down. This process is not dramatic. It does not feel like a revelation. It feels at first like something is wrong because calm starts to feel unfamiliar. Stillness starts to feel suspicious. You have been wired for chaos for so long that the absence of it registers as a threat rather than a relief. You might feel a strange emptiness that you mistake for missing them. You might feel a restlessness that you interpret as a sign that going no contact was a mistake. You might even manufacture small anxieties to fill the space where the constant tension used to live, because your nervous system doesn't yet know what to do with peace. This is one of the most misunderstood phases of recovery from narcissistic abuse. The discomfort of early silence is not evidence that you belong back in the relationship. It is evidence of how deeply the relationship rewired you. It is withdrawal, real physiological, psychological withdrawal from a dynamic that your brain had learned to treat as normal. Just as someone recovering from any long-term stressful situation needs time for their body to recalibrate, you need time for yours. And that time, uncomfortable as it is not empty time. It is the most productive time your healing has ever had. Because underneath the discomfort, underneath the restlessness and the strange grief and the moments where your hand hovers over your phone, something is being rebuilt, something quiet and foundational. Your sense of your own reality is starting to come back online. The constant second guessing, did that really happen? Was I overreacting? Maybe it wasn't that bad. Begins to quiet, not all at once, not in a straight line. But the fog that narcissistic relationships create, the fog that makes you doubt your own perceptions and memories and feelings, starts to lift when the source of the fog is no longer in your daily life. And that clarity, once it begins, does not stop. This is the section nobody who is still inside a narcissistic dynamic is fully ready to hear. But if you have stayed with this video all the way to here, you are not fully inside it anymore. Something in you has already shifted. Something in you came to this video not to be entertained, but to be told the truth, and the truth of what happens in the final stage of mutual silence, what it does to them, what it builds in you, and what it ultimately reveals about everything that came before is the most important thing you will hear today. Let's start with the narcissist, because by the time the silence is stretched into weeks, something has happened inside them that they will never voluntarily show you and will rarely admit, even in their most private moments. The anxiety that began when you didn't respond to their first reach out has not faded with time. It has compounded. Each day that passes without your reaction adds another layer to a growing internal crisis that their entire psychological architecture was built to avoid. Remember what we said earlier, the narcissist's sense of self is not internal. It is borrowed. It is built from reflections, and you were one of their primary mirrors, not their only one, but a significant one, a consistent one they had spent considerable time and energy calibrating to reflect back exactly what they needed to see. Without that mirror, the reflection becomes inconsistent. The image of themselves they have worked so hard to maintain starts to show cracks, not in ways other people would necessarily notice, not in ways they would ever let show publicly, but in the quiet moments in the middle of the night, in the space between one distraction and the next. The cracks are there. And what lives inside those cracks is the thing a narcissist spends their entire life running from, the raw, unmedicated truth of who they are without the performance. A person who does not know how to love without controlling. A person who does not know how to connect without calculating. A person who is, at their most fundamental level, deeply and tragically alone in a way that no amount of external validation has ever truly fixed and never will. Your silence did not create that aloneness. It only removed the noise that was drowning it out. Now here is the part that will genuinely shock you. Here is the thing that changes the way you understand, not just this relationship, but every dynamic you have ever been in or will ever be in. The narcissist, in the depth of this silence, does not reach a moment of genuine reckoning. They do not sit with the cracks and decide to look at them honestly. They do not arrive after enough quiet days at a place of self-awareness that transforms them into someone capable of the relationship you deserved. This is the hope that keeps so many people tethered even after they leave. The hope that the silence will be the thing that finally wakes them up. That the absence of you will teach them your value. That they will feel the loss deeply enough that it changes something real inside them. It doesn't work that way. And understanding why it doesn't work that way is not pessimism, it is liberation. A narcissist does not respond to loss by growing. They respond to loss by replacing. When the discomfort of your absence becomes too much to sit with, they do not turn inward and do the painful work of genuine self-examination. They turn outward and find a new source of the reflection they lost, a new person to mirror them, a new relationship to pour the performance into, a new dynamic where they can once again be the most important person in the room. This is not a choice they make consciously every time. For many narcissists, it is as automatic and unconscious as breathing. It is simply what they do when the supply runs out. They find more supply. They do not ask why they needed it. They do not question whether the need itself is the problem. They just fill the tank and keep driving. And when you truly understand this, not just intellectually, but in the place where you still held hope, something releases. Something you have been carrying without realizing how heavy it was finally gets set down. Because the question you have been secretly asking yourself, the one underneath all the other questions, was I not enough to make them change, finally gets answered, not with cruelty, not with blame, but with clarity. You were never going to be enough to make them change, not because of anything lacking in you, but because change of that depth requires a person to want it more than they fear it. And a narcissist fears genuine self-examination more than they fear losing any single person on earth. What you mistook for them not loving you enough is actually them not being capable of the kind of love that requires honesty with oneself. Those are two completely different things, and only one of them is about you. Now let's talk about what this silence is doing for you, because this is where the story stops being about them entirely and becomes finally and fully yours. Every day of silence is a day your nervous system gets quieter. Every week that passes without the chaos of managing their emotions, anticipating their moods, shrinking yourself to fit their needs, is a week your sense of self gets slightly louder. It is not a linear process. There will be days inside the silence that feel worse than the relationship did. There will be moments where the grief is so heavy you convince yourself that the pain of the relationship was at least familiar, at least a kind of company. There will be nights where you replay the good moments, and there were good moments. The beginning was real enough in its way, and you wonder if you gave up too soon, if you were too hasty, if the person you first met is still in there somewhere, waiting to come back. On those nights, remember this. The person you first met was a presentation, a carefully curated opening act designed, consciously or not, to make you attack. The chaos that followed was not a corruption of something pure. It was the inevitable reality beneath the presentation asserting itself. What you fell in love with was not a lie exactly, but it was a version of a person that was never sustainable, never the full picture, never who they actually are when the performance gets tired and the mask slips and the real dynamic underneath finally shows its face. What you are building in this silence is something they cannot touch. You are rebuilding the relationship you have with your own mind, with your own perceptions, with your own sense of what is real and what was manufactured. You are relearning how to trust the way you feel, what you notice, what you know to be true without needing someone else to confirm it for you. That is not a small thing. That is everything. That is the thing narcissistic relationships most specifically and most deliberately dismantle, and the silence is where it comes back. You are not waiting in this silence. You are not hiding. You are not losing. You are the only one in this dynamic who is doing the one thing that actually matters. You are becoming more yourself, not less, with every single day that passes. They are becoming more desperate, more destabilized, more dependent on the next external fix to keep the image intact. You are becoming quieter inside, clearer, more grounded in who you are, an A. D, what you will and will not accept from this moment forward. That is not nothing, that is the whole thing. And if you needed one final thing to hold on to when the silence gets heavy and the doubt creeps in and your hand moves toward your phone, hold on to this. The version of you that exists on the other side of this silence, the version that didn't break, didn't reach back out, didn't hand back the power they lost, that version of you is someone they will never have access to again. Not because you are building walls, but because you are building something so much stronger than walls. You are building the unshakable knowledge of your own worth. And nothing they say, nothing they send, nothing they perform for mutual friends or post online or whisper through people who still have access to your life, none of it can reach someone who finally, completely knows their own value. The silence isn't the end of your story. It is the first chapter of the one that actually belongs to you. If this video helped you see something more clearly today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below telling me which part hit you hardest. Your words might be exactly what someone else needs to read tonight. And if you want to go even deeper in understanding these dynamics and finally breaking free from them for good, subscribe and stay close, because what comes next is going to change everything. There is a moment that almost every person who has ever loved a narcissist can describe with uncomfortable precision. It is not the moment the abuse started. It is not the first time they lied to your face, or the first time they made you feel like the problem, or even the first time you caught yourself apologizing for something you didn't do. The moment I'm talking about comes later. It comes after months, sometimes years of trying, after you have explained yourself until your voice gave out, after you have cried in front of them hoping that just once your tears would land somewhere real, after you have rearranged your personality, your schedule, your dreams, and your sense of self around the task of managing one person's ego. The moment comes quietly. You're standing in a room or sitting in your car or lying in the dark at 3 a.m. and something shifts. Not dramatically, not with music or revelation, just a small, exhausted, almost imperceptible shift, and a thought surfaces that you can't push back down. What if none of this was ever going to work? What if I have been trying to fill a hole that has no bottom? That thought is the beginning of everything we are going to talk about today, because that thought, as painful as it is the first honest thing your mind has allowed itself to think in a very long time. And the reason you suppressed it for so long, the reason most people do, is not weakness. It is not stupidity. It is not some flaw in your character that made you susceptible. The reason you kept trying is because you are human. And humans are wired at a biological level to keep reaching for connection, to keep attempting repair, to keep believing that if they just find the right words, the right moment, the right version of themselves, the person they love will finally show up for them. That instinct is not pathological. In a healthy relationship, it is exactly what sustains love over time. The tragedy of a narcissistic relationship is that the same instinct that would have built something beautiful in a different context becomes, in this one, the mechanism of your own destruction. So let's start with the question that everything else depends on. What is a narcissist actually doing when they engage with you? Because most people, even people who have done significant reading on this topic, still carry a fundamental misunderstanding about what is happening beneath the surface of these interactions. They believe on some level that the narcissist is trying to connect, that the cruelty, the manipulation, the gaslighting, even the rage are all distorted expressions of something that is at its root relational a broken attempt at love. And that belief, more than anything else, is what keeps people locked inside the dynamic long after every other part of them is begging to leave. Here is the truth that the research gives us and that trauma therapists and psychoanalysts have understood for decades, but that rarely gets said plainly enough. A narcissist is not trying to connect with you, they are extracting from you. There is a concept in clinical psychology called narcissistic supply, first introduced by the Austrian psychoanalyst Otto von Ischl, and later developed extensively by object relations theorists. And it describes something that should change the way you understand every interaction you have ever had with this person. Narcissistic supply is the emotional sustenance a narcissist draws from other people. And unlike the sustenance that flows between two people in a genuinely mutual relationship, this is entirely one-directional. It does not nourish you in return. It does not even see you. It simply takes what most people discover with a jolt of recognition when they first encounter this concept, is that the supply does not require positive emotion from you. Your admiration feeds a narcissist, but so does your distress. Your praise is supply, and so is your confusion, your pleading, your anger, your silence that they successfully broke, your tears that confirm their power over you. The content of your emotional response is almost irrelevant to them. What matters is the response itself. What matters is that you are still there, still reacting, still oriented toward them. What matters is that you are still their mirror, because that is what you have always been in this dynamic. Not a partner, not even a person, in the full sense of the word. A mirror that confirms their existence. This is where I need you to stay with me, because this is the part that most people hear intellectually but do not yet feel in their body. At the core of narcissistic personality structure, beneath the confidence, beneath the arrogance, beneath the charm that probably drew you in and the cruelty that has kept you off balance ever since, there is an emptiness, not a dramatic emptiness, not something they are visibly suffering from, but a structural one, a self that was never fully formed, because the conditions required for genuine self-development, unconditional attunement, being loved, not for performance, but for existence, were not reliably present in the earliest chapters of their life. The psyche, in its extraordinary resourcefulness, built a replacement, a constructed self, a persona of superiority and dominance, designed to extract externally what was never provided internally. That constructed self has no roots. It has no stable foundation. It is held together entirely by the reflections of people like you, which means that when you stop reflecting, when you withdraw your attention, your reaction, your emotional energy from someone whose entire psychological architecture depends on those things to feel real, you do not simply inconvenience them. You do not merely annoy them or inspire their contempt. You destabilize them at the deepest level available. You become, in the most precise clinical sense of the word, their worst nightmare. Not because you have done anything aggressive, not because you have mounted a campaign or told their secrets or delivered the devastating speech you have been composing in your head for months, but because you have done something their entire system has no defense against. You have simply stopped. And that is what we are going to talk about today, what it actually means to treat a narcissist as though they are dead, why it works at a psychological level that goes far deeper than strategy or revenge, what happens when you do it, what they do in response, and exactly how to hold your ground through it. And most importantly, what begins to happen inside you in the silence that follows when you finally stop feeding what has been feeding on you. There is a phrase that tends to make people uncomfortable the first time they hear it. Treat them like they are dead. And I understand that discomfort. I want to sit with it for a moment before we move past it, because the discomfort itself is worth examining. When most people hear that instruction, their first reaction is resistance. It feels cold. It feels unkind. It feels like the kind of thing a bitter, hardened person would do, someone who has closed themselves off from empathy, someone who has let their wounds turn them into something they don't want to be. And underneath that resistance, if you are honest with yourself, there is probably something else. A fear that if you truly stop engaging, truly stop responding, truly withdraw every last thread of emotional investment from this person, you will have confirmed their narrative about you, that we're always the cold one, the distant one, the one who never really cared. I want you to notice that thought. I want you to hold it up to the light for just a moment, because it is one of the most sophisticated traps in the entire architecture of narcissistic abuse. The idea that your continued engagement is evidence of your warmth and your disengagement is evidence of your cruelty was not something you arrived at on your own. It was installed. It was placed inside you carefully and repeatedly by someone who understood, whether consciously or not, that as long as you believed your decency required your participation, they would never lose access to you. Your goodness was turned into a leash. And every time you almost left, almost stopped responding, almost let the silence stretch long enough to mean something, that belief pulled you back, because you did not want to be the cold one. You did not want to be the one who gave up. You did not want to become someone who treats another human being as though they do not exist. Here is what I want you to understand. Treating a narcissist like they are dead is not a statement about their humanity. It is a statement about your survival. It is not something you do to them. It is something you do for yourself. And it is not coldness. It is the most radical, most deliberate, most psychologically sophisticated act of self-preservation available to you. Let me show you the difference, because it matters enormously. Coldness is reactive. It is the emotional shutdown that happens when a person has been hurt so many times that they stop allowing themselves to feel. Coldness is armor. Coldness is still about them because it is a response to them, a shape you have taken in reaction to what they did to you. What we are talking about is something entirely different. What we are talking about is neutrality, not the performance of neutrality, not the gritted teeth, white-knuckled pretense of not caring while you are quietly screaming inside. Genuine, settled, internally sourced neutrality that comes not from shutting down your emotions, but from redirecting them away from someone who has demonstrated repeatedly and conclusively that they will only use your emotions against you. Think about how you actually relate to someone who has genuinely passed away, not someone you are grieving in the acute, raw, early stages of loss, but someone whose death you have had time to integrate. Someone who is simply no longer part of the living architecture of your daily life. You do not argue with them in your head. You do not rehearse conversations hoping they will finally understand you. You do not brace for their moods or reshape yourself to manage their reactions or lie awake wondering what they meant by that comment 3 weeks ago. They are gone. And in their absence, something that was always beneath the noise of managing them begins to quietly resurface. You begin slowly and sometimes disorientally to hear yourself again. That is the energy we are talking about, that quality of release. That particular freedom that comes not from winning, not from getting the apology or the acknowledgement or the admission you always deserved, but from simply no longer needing it, from having transferred your attention, your energy, your emotional investment away from someone who is consuming all of it and back toward your own life, toward your own thoughts, toward your own thoughts, toward your own wants, which you may have almost forgotten how to access. This is not a performance you put on for their benefit. It is not a strategy designed to make them miss you or regret what they did or finally understand what they lost. In fact, if you are doing it with any of those intentions still active, you are not quite there yet, and that is okay.
This
is a process. But the destination is a place where their reaction to your silence is genuinely, completely no longer the point. Now, let's talk about what this actually looks like in practice. Because one of the most common things people say when they first encounter the concept of going no contact, of withdrawing supply, of treating the narcissist though they are dead, is that it sounds right in theory, but they have no idea how to actually do it. Their mind keeps returning to the person. They find themselves composing responses to arguments that haven't even happened yet. They check the narcissist's social media, not because they want to, but because something in them, something that feels almost compulsive, keeps pulling them back. They draft messages they never send. They rehearse the perfect final statement that will make everything make sense. And then they feel ashamed of all of this, as though the fact that they cannot simply switch off their investment proves something is wrong with them. Nothing is wrong with you. What you are experiencing is not weakness or dysfunction. It is the predictable neurological consequence of a very specific kind of psychological conditioning that we are going to unpack in detail later in this video. For now, what I want you to hold on to is this. The goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to feel it all. Every bit of the grief and the anger and the confusion and the loss, and to feel it somewhere the narcissist cannot reach, inside yourself, in therapy with people who are safe, not in front of them and not in response to them. Because the moment your emotion becomes visible to them, the moment they can see that they still have the ability to generate a reaction in you, it becomes supply. Even your pain becomes something they are fed by. The silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the decision about where your feelings belong. So we have established what narcissistic supply is, and we have established what it means to withdraw it. But I want to go somewhere deeper now, because there is a question sitting underneath everything we have covered so far. And if I do not answer it directly, everything else will feel like instruction without understanding. The question is this: why does it work? Why does your silence specifically land with such devastating force on someone who spent the entire relationship performing invincibility? Why does a person who made you feel invisible, irrelevant, and disposable suddenly become destabilized the moment you treat them the way they always claim to see you? Why does indifference of all things become the one weapon that their entire arsenal has no answer for? The answer is not satisfying in the way that revenge fantasies are satisfying. It does not involve them suffering visibly in a way you get to witness. But it is far more profound than revenge. And understanding it fully will do something that revenge never could. It will permanently change the way you see them. When you see them clearly, really clearly, without the distortion of hope or fear or the need to make their behavior mean something about your worth, the whole dissolves. Not all at once, but it begins. Let's go back to the beginning of the narcissistic personality itself, because this is where the answer lives. Narcissism at its clinical root is not arrogance. It is not selfishness in the ordinary sense of the word. It is a survival adaptation. It is what the human psyche constructs when a child, in their most formative and vulnerable years, does not receive what every child fundamentally requires to develop a stable, integrated sense of self. What they require is unconditional attunement, being loved not for their performance, not for how they make a parent feel, not for their achievements or their compliance or their ability to manage an adult's emotional needs, but simply for their existence. When that attunement is absent, when love is conditional or unpredictable, when the child's authentic emotional experience is consistently ignored, minimized, or punished, the developing psyche makes an extraordinarily intelligent decision. It buries the authentic self, the one that was too much or not enough, the one that kept getting rejected, and it constructs an alternative, a performing self, a grandiose, armored, carefully managed persona built entirely around extracting the external validation that was never reliably provided from the inside. This is what we are dealing with when we talk about a narcissist, not a powerful person, not a confident person, a performed person, a person whose entire sense of reality, whose entire experience of existing as a coherent human being is dependent on the continuous input of other people's reactions. Without that input, the constructed self has nothing to stand on. It does not have an inner world to retreat to. It does not have a stable sense of identity that persists when no one is watching. It has only the mirror. And when the mirror goes blank, when you stop reflecting, stop reacting the emotional data that tells them they are real and relevant and in control, the structure does not simply feel inconvenienced. It feels existentially threatened. Psychoanalysts call this a narcissistic injury. And the response to narcissistic injury, which clinicians call narcissistic rage, is not the anger of someone who is powerful. It is the terror of someone whose psychological survival feels suddenly, viscerally at stake. This is what I want you to carry with you, because it will protect you when things get harder, which they often do before they get easier. The rage is not evidence of your wrongdoing. The escalation is not proof that you have been too cold, too harsh, too unforgiving. It is a diagnostic signal. It is the most honest thing a narcissist will ever show you, because it reveals with complete clarity exactly how much of their stability was built on your compliance. Every text they send after you go silent, every sudden reappearance dressed in warmth and nostalgia, every whisper campaign, every attempt to reach you through mutual friends, every escalating provocation designed to force any reaction, even anger, even disgust, because even your anger confirms that they still exist in your emotional world. All of it is the sound of a structure collapsing that was only ever held up by you. Here's something I need to say carefully, because it is a place where a lot of people get pulled back in. When a narcissist begins to lose their grip on you, one of the first things they deploy is not rage. Rage comes later. What comes first is tenderness. It is the sudden, almost uncanny reappearance of the person you first fell in love with. The warmth you spent the whole relationship chasing, the attentiveness you kept trying to earn, the gentleness you saw glimpses of in the beginning and held on to as proof of who they really were. It surfaces right when you have created meaningful distance, right when you have almost convinced yourself that leaving was right. And for a nervous system that has been trained over months or years to associate this person with both the deepest wound and the only available relief, the pull of that tenderness is almost unbearable. This is called hoovering, named after the vacuum, because it is designed to suck you back in. And the cruelty of it is not just in the manipulation itself, but in how precisely it is targeted. They are not performing a generic version of kindness. They are performing the specific version of themselves that you told them through years of hope and reaction and tearful conversations that you were still holding out for. Every time you explained what you needed, you gave them the blueprint. Every time you described what the relationship could be if they would just try, you handed them the script for exactly this moment. They are not transformed. They are tactical. And the version of them standing in front of you right now, soft and remorseful, and finally saying everything you always needed to hear, is not a person who has changed. It is a system in panic, reaching for the one power source it knows how to activate. When you understand this, really understand it at the level where it stops being information and starts being perception, something shifts in how you experience these moments. The tenderness stops feeling like a door and starts feeling like a trap door. You can see it for what it is without needing to harden yourself against it, without needing to hate them, to resist it. You simply see it clearly. And clarity, as we said at the beginning, is where freedom lives, not the freedom of someone who has stopped feeling. The freedom of someone who finally sees without the distortion of hope that was always costing them more than they could afford to keep spending. That is the freedom that silence builds. That is what becomes available in the space where your reaction used to be. And it is worth every uncomfortable moment of learning to hold it. There is a stage that nobody warns you about adequately. You have done the reading. You understand the psychology. You have accepted, at least intellectually, that what you experienced was not a relationship in any mutual sense of the word, but an extraction. You have started to pull back. You have let some silences stretch. You have stopped explaining yourself, stopped initiating, stopped performing the emotional labor of managing someone who is never going to acknowledge the cost of it. And something has begun to shift. Small things at first. You sleep a little better. You notice a thought that belongs entirely to you, not filtered through the question of how they would react to it. You catch yourself making a decision, a small, ordinary daily decision, without first consulting their imagined response. These moments are quiet. They do not feel like victory. They feel more like remembering, like the faint return of a frequency you had forgotten you are capable of receiving. Then, without warning, the grief arrives. Not grief for them necessarily, though. That is real too, and we will get to it. But a deeper grief, a grief for the years, for the version of yourself that spent so long contorting, shrinking, performing, and explaining. For the mornings you woke up already anxious. For the relationships with other people that quietly eroded while all your emotional bandwidth was consumed by one person's instability. For the dreams you put on hold, the opportunities you didn't take, the parts of yourself you edited out because they made the narcissist uncomfortable or competitive or contemptuous. This grief is not a sign that you are going backward. It is a sign that you are finally present enough to feel what was always true. You are not falling apart. You are thawing. I want to talk about identity because this is the dimension of narcissistic abuse that receives the least attention and causes some of the most lasting damage. We talk extensively about the trauma. We talk about the gaslighting, the manipulation, the erosion of trust, the hypervigilance that follows you into rooms where you are completely safe. All of that is real, and all of it deserves the conversation it is getting. But what we do not talk about enough is the specific systematic way that prolonged exposure to a narcissist dismantles a person's sense of self, not through one dramatic act, through 1,000 small ones. A comment here, a dismissal there, a raised eyebrow at your excitement, a subtle reframing of your memory until you stop trusting your own recollection of events, a pattern of responses to your authentic self that teach you without a single explicit statement that who you actually are is either too much or not enough, and that the version of you worth keeping is the one that makes them comfortable. Psychologists call this identity erosion, and what makes it so insidious is that it does not feel like violence while it is happening. It feels like growth. It feels like maturity. It feels like love because you were told implicitly or explicitly that containing yourself, adjusting yourself, softening your edges and muting your frequency was what intimacy required. That to be loved, you had to be manageable. And so you became manageable. Most survivors did, not because they were weak, but because the need for connection is so fundamental, so biologically wired into the human system, that we will reshape ourselves to extraordinary degrees before we will accept that the connection we are fighting for was never safe enough to be worth the reshaping. Here is what begins to happen when you stop, when you genuinely, consistently, from a place of growing internal clarity, rather than performed indifference. Withdraw your energy from the narcissist and begin returning it to yourself. The first thing you notice is the noise, not external noise, internal noise, the constant background hum of monitoring, anticipating, bracing, calculating, that you had become so accustomed to that you stopped registering it as anything other than normal consciousness. When it begins to quiet, it is disorienting before it is peaceful. You may not know what to do with the mental space. You may find yourself reaching. G for the anxiety, the way you would reach for a phone that is no longer in your pocket. The absence of hypervigilance can feel paradoxically like something is wrong because your nervous system learned to read calm as the moment before the explosion, and it does not yet know how to trust stillness. This is normal. This is not a sign that you cannot heal or that the damage is permanent. It is a sign that your nervous system is doing exactly what nervous systems do. It is operating from the map it was given, and the work of recovery, the real work, the work that happens not in the moments of dramatic resolve, but in the quiet, ordinary dailiness of choosing differently, is the slow, patient process of drawing a new map, of accumulating enough experiences of safety, of calm that does not collapse, of stillness that does not precede violence, that your body begins to update its predictions. That is not a fast process. It cannot be rushed or hacked or bypassed, but it is happening even when you cannot feel it happening. And every single day that you do not return to the dynamic is a day that rewrites something in the architecture of your nervous system. Now I want to address something directly because I know it is sitting in the room. The question of whether any of this means you have to stop loving them, whether choosing yourself requires you to harden yourself against the genuine feeling you had, the real tenderness, the actual hope, all of it real, even inside something that was harmful. I want to tell you that you do not have to stop loving them to leave them. You do not have to turn them into a monster in your mind to justify protecting yourself. The most mature, most honest, most genuinely healed version of this looks like holding both things at once, that the feeling was real and that the relationship was not safe, that you can wish them well from an enormous distance, that you can grieve what you wanted it to be without returning to what it actually was. That love, real love, including the love you have for yourself, is sometimes most honestly expressed not by staying, but by finally, quietly, without announcement or drama or the perfect final word, simply walking away and not looking back. This is what it means to treat them like they are dead, not hatred, not performance, not a strategy for winning something, a private, settled, internally sovereign decision that this person no longer occupies emotional real estate in the only life you have been given. You are not doing it to become their worst nightmare, though you will. You are doing it because somewhere underneath everything they told you to be, the person you actually are has been waiting with extraordinary patience for you to finally come home. And that person, the one who existed before the relationship rewrote them, the one with opinions they did not censor and desires they did not suppress, and a frequency that did not need to be muted to make someone else feel powerful, that person was never lost. They were only quiet. And in the silence that follows your withdrawal, in the space where their chaos used to live, you will begin, slowly and then all at once, to hear them again. That is not their worst nightmare. That is your best beginning.